I walked into Branson and Roystro that night with one simple goal: a quiet dinner to shake off the weight of the week. The place smelled like seared steak and expensive wine, the kind of spot where people come to feel important. I'd reserved a small table in the corner, just me, a medium-rare ribeye, and a glass of scotch to keep me company. The hostess smiled as she led me through the dim glow of chandeliers and clinking glasses. I was almost there, loosening my tie when I heard it. A voice I hadn't heard in person for years, but could never forget. Logan, poor man. Still a secretary? It cut through the murmur of the restaurant like a knife through butter. I froze mid-step, my hand still on my tie, and turned toward the bar. There she was, Camille, my ex-wife, perched on a stool with a glass of red wine in her hand. Her lips curled into that familiar smirk. Next to her stood Preston Vance, her new husband, all slick hair and tailored suit, looking like he'd just stepped out of a real estate ad. His arm rested casually around her waist, but his eyes were on me, sizing me up like I was some stray dog who'd wandered into the wrong yard. Camille's words hung in the air, loud enough that a couple at a nearby table glanced over, their forks pausing halfway to their mouths. I felt the heat creep up my neck, but I didn't flinch. I've spent years learning how to keep my face steady, my voice calm, no matter what's thrown at me. "Good to see you too, Camille," I said, nodding politely, my tone flat as a board. Preston chuckled, a low, smug sound, and raised his glass to her like I just proved some point. I could have corrected her right then. Could have told her I wasn't a secretary, not in the way she meant anyway. Could have said I'd built something bigger than anything she or Preston could dream of touching. But I didn't. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't owe them a damn thing. Let them think what they want, I told myself as I slid into my seat across the room. The waiter came by and I ordered my steak and scotch, keeping my eyes on the menu instead of the bar. Their laughter floated over every now and then, sharp and deliberate, like they wanted me to hear it. "Still fetching coffee for the big shots, huh?" Preston called out once, loud enough that a guy in a suit 2 tables over smirked into his napkin. I took a slow sip of my drink when it arrived, letting the burns settle in my chest. They had no idea who I was now, and that was fine. I learned long ago that the best moves are the ones nobody sees coming. The steak was good, juicy, cooked just right, but I barely tasted it. My mind was already spinning, not with anger, but with something else. Satisfaction, maybe, because I knew something they didn't. I'd spent a decade building a life they couldn't touch, a world they didn't even know existed. Northgate Strategies wasn't just a name on a letterhead. It was my empire forged in shadows, brick by brick, and here they were, sipping their overpriced wine, thinking they'd won something by humiliating me in front of a room full of strangers. I chewed my food slowly, watching them from the corner of my eye. Camille tossed her hair back, laughing at some story Preston was telling, probably about his latest deal or his shiny new yacht. They looked so sure of themselves, so untouchable. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. By the time I paid my bill, they were still at the bar, oblivious to the fact that I'd already left the table and their little game behind. I tipped the waiter extra, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the cool night air. The city lights buzzed around me, and I took a deep breath, letting the tension roll off my shoulders. That encounter wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. I didn't know it yet. But the next day would turn their world upside down, and I'd be the one holding the hammer. As I climbed into my car and started the engine, I couldn't help but smile just a little. They thought they'd seen the whole picture, but they didn't even have the frame. Tomorrow, I'd show them what happens when you underestimate the guy you think is still pouring coffee. For now, though, I drove home, the taste of scotch still on my tongue, and let them have their night. It would be the last one they'd enjoy for a while. I still remember the day I decided to wear the mask. It wasn't some grand moment with lightning crashing or trumpets blaring. It was just me, sitting in a cramped apartment 10 years ago, staring at a stack of rejection letters and a bank account with less than $100 to its name. Camille and I were married then, and I was fresh out of business school, my head full of dreams about turning failing companies into gold mines. I'd spent months sketching out plans, mapping strategies, convinced I could build something real. That night, I sat her down at our tiny kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg we never fixed, and laid it all out. "I want to start a firm," I told her, my voice buzzing with excitement. "We can help businesses that are sinking, restructure them, save jobs, make them profitable again." I even had a name picked out: Northgate Strategies. I thought she'd see it, maybe even cheer me on. Instead, she laughed, a sharp, cold sound that hit me like a slap. "You," she said, leaning back in her chair, arms crossed. "Logan, you don't build empires with passion. You inherit them or you marry them." She glanced toward the living room where her father's latest gift, a sleek leather couch, sat like a trophy of his wealth. I'd met her dad a few times, a big-shot financier with a handshake that felt like a power play. I'd pitch my idea to him too, hoping he'd invest or at least give me a nod of approval. He didn't laugh like Camille, but his response was worse. Silence followed by a slow shake of his head. "Stick to something safe, son," he'd said, like I was a kid asking for a toy he couldn't afford. That night, after Camille went to bed, I sat there alone, the rejection letters spread out like a losing hand of cards. I could have given up, could have taken some entry-level job at her dad's firm, shuffled papers, and called it a life. But something in me snapped, not with anger, but with resolve. I decided right then I'd do it anyway, and I'd do it my way. If they wouldn't see me as the guy with the big ideas, I'd make them see me as nobody at all until it was too late to look away. I started Northgate Strategies the next week, but I didn't put my name on it. I used an alias for the CEO, some made-up title holder nobody would ever meet, and listed myself as an administrative assistant. It wasn't glamorous. I rented a cheap office downtown, a windowless box that smelled like old carpet and desperation. I answered my own phones, typed my own emails, scheduled my own meetings. When I pitched to clients, I'd show up with a notepad and a pen, letting them think I was just the guy taking orders from someone higher up. They'd talk over me, ignore me, sometimes even ask me to grab them a coffee. And I'd do it every time with a polite, "Yes, sir," or "Right away, ma'am." Meanwhile, I was the one calling the shots, sketching out plans in the middle of the night, figuring out how to save their companies from the messes they'd made. Camille didn't know. Nobody did. She'd roll her eyes when I'd come home late, muttering about how I was wasting my life on some dead-end job. "Why don't you just work for Dad?" she'd say, flipping through a magazine while I heated up leftovers. I'd shrug and tell her I liked what I did, which wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. The marriage fell apart not long after that. She wanted a husband who'd climb her father's ladder, not one who spent his days playing errand boy, as she put it. The divorce was quick, quiet, and cold. She took the apartment and half my savings. I took my plans and walked away. Looking back, it was the best trade I ever made. Without her doubt dragging me down, I could focus on what mattered, building something they'd never see coming. The mask wasn't just about hiding. It was about control. Every time someone dismissed me, every time they handed me their empty cup or talked over me in a meeting, I got stronger. I learned how to listen, how to watch, how to spot the cracks in their armor. I wasn't some hotshot yelling about his genius from a corner office. I was the guy in the background moving pieces they didn't even know were on the board. By the time Northgate started turning heads, I'd already saved 3 companies from bankruptcy, all without anyone knowing my name. The alias kept me safe, kept me invisible. Clients thanked the team or the CEO, never realizing they were shaking hands with him. It was a game I played alone, and I played it well. That night at the restaurant, when Camille mocked me, she didn't see a secretary. She saw the mask I'd chosen, and I wasn't ready to take it off. Not yet. But soon, she'd see what was underneath, and I'd make damn sure it was worth the wait. The first year of Northgate Strategies was a grind that nearly broke me. I'd wake up every morning in that tiny office above the Thai takeout joint. The smell of fish sauce and frying oil seeping through the floorboards, reminding me how far I was from the glossy boardrooms I dreamed of. My desk was a second-hand thing I'd picked up from a thrift store, wobbly and scratched, and my chair creaked every time I leaned back. I had no money left after 6 months. My savings were gone, eaten up by rent, a beat-up laptop, and the cheap suits I wore to look halfway professional. I'd sit there at night alone with a cup of instant coffee and a stack of spreadsheets, wondering if Camille and her dad were right. Maybe I was a fool chasing something that would never work. But then I'd shake it off, crack my knuckles, and get back to it. I wasn't ready to quit, not when I'd barely started. The breakthrough came when a small logistics company called Trident Hall took a chance on me. They were on their last legs. Debts piling up, trucks rusting in the yard, employees jumping ship. The owner, a gruff guy named Tom with a beard like steel wool, didn't have much faith in me at first. I showed up to our meeting in a wrinkled shirt, carrying a binder full of ideas, and he looked me up and down like I was some kid selling cookies door to door. "You're the assistant, right?" he said, squinting. "Where's the boss?" I smiled, set the binder on his desk, and told him I'm the one you're meeting with. Let's talk about saving your business. He didn't kick me out, which was a start. I spent an hour walking him through my plan, cut costs, renegotiate supplier contracts, streamline routes. He didn't say much, just nodded and scratched his chin. At the end, he leaned back and said, "All right, kid, you've got 2 months. Don't screw me over." I didn't sleep much those 2 months. I'd drive out to Trident's warehouse at dawn, watching the drivers load trucks, scribbling notes on a clipboard while they ignored me. I'd call vendors from a payphone. My cell plan had lapsed, haggling until my voice went hoarse-aro. Nights were spent in that office, poring over numbers, figuring out where every dollar could stretch. Tom thought I was just relaying orders from some mysterious CEO, and I let him. It was easier that way. By the end of the trial, Trident was breaking even. By the end of the year, they were turning a profit, small but steady. Tom shook my hand, a rare grin cracking his face, and said, "Tell your boss he's got a gift." I just nodded and said, "I'll pass it along." That was the first brick in Northgate's foundation, laid in silence, with nobody knowing who held the trowel. Word started to spread after that. Not loud, not flashy, just a whisper among desperate business owners. I'd get calls from companies I'd never heard of. People asking for Northgate's team to take a look at their books. I'd show up alone, still playing the assistant, still carrying coffee and taking notes while they spilled their problems. Then I'd go back to my office and work out the fixes, new budgets, layoffs if I had to, partnerships to shore up cash flow. Every success built the next one. I saved a textile mill in Ohio, then a hardware chain in Michigan. Each time, I stayed in the shadows, letting the results speak while I shuffled papers and smiled like I was just the help. My bank account started growing again. Slow at first, then faster. I moved out of that dump above the takeout place into a modest apartment, bought a better suit, upgraded my laptop. But I kept the mask on. No fancy office, no big sign with my name on it. Northgate was a ghost and I was its shadow. Then I met Bryn. She was an analyst at one of the companies I saved. A sharp, no-nonsense woman with a knack for spotting patterns I'd miss. When her firm turned around, she tracked me down, showing up at my new office with a resume and a question. Who's really running this show? I tried to play it off, but she saw through me in 10 minutes flat. You're not just the assistant, she said, arms crossed, staring me down. Nobody this good at fixing messes takes orders. They give them. I hired her on the spot. She became my right hand, the first person I trusted with the truth. Together, we built a team, small, quiet, and damn good at what they did. We'd sit around a folding table in my apartment, eating takeout and plotting turnarounds like it was a war room. Northgate grew, but we stayed invisible. CEOs thanked us over the phone, never knowing who they were talking to. Boardrooms buzzed about the shadow firm that could save anything. And I liked it that way. Power wasn't about a corner office or a title on a door. It was about results nobody could trace back to you. By the time I ran into Camille and Preston at the restaurant, Northgate was a machine humming in the background of industries they'd never understand. That first year of hell, the sleepless nights, the empty wallet, the doubt, it had forged something unbreakable. I'd built a foundation in silence, and it was stronger than anything they could have inherited or bought. They mocked me that night, thinking I was still the guy scrambling for scraps. They didn't know I'd been stacking bricks for a decade, waiting for the moment to show them the wall. And that moment was coming, quietly, steadily, like everything else I'd built. The morning after that run-in at Branson and Rowe, I was back in my office, a plain room on the 10th floor of a downtown building that didn't scream money, but got the job done. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo of my old college crew, a reminder of simpler days. I was at my desk, a sturdy oak thing Bryn had insisted I upgrade to, flipping through a stack of contracts that needed my signature. The hum of the city filtered through the window, car horns, distant sirens, the pulse of life outside. I'd shaken off the restaurant scene by then, or at least I thought I had. Camille's voice still echoed in my head. Poor man. Still a secretary. But I wasn't mad. I was focused. The scotch from last night was a faint memory, replaced by black coffee and a chipped muck. Then Bryn burst in, her heels clicking fast on the hardwood floor, a file clutched in her hand like it was a live grenade. "Logan, you need to see this," she said, her voice sharp enough to pull me out of my thoughts. She didn't knock. Never did when something big was up. I set the contracts down and leaned back in my chair, raising an eyebrow. Bryn's not one for drama unless it's worth it. So I knew this wasn't small. She slapped the file on my desk, the papers fanning out a little, and pointed at the top sheet. "Vince Cordes Holdings," she said. "Preston's company. They're pushing a merger to buy out a chain of medical facilities, 5 hospitals, all on the break. Big money, $100 million on the table." I scanned the page. It was a standard proposal, the kind I'd seen 100 times, ambitious, flashy, and probably over-leveraged. Preston's name was all over it, his signature scrolled in bold ink like he owned the world. I almost laughed. "Okay," I said, looking up at Bryn. "Why is this my problem?" She flipped to the second page and tapped a highlighted clause. "This," she said, her finger jabbing the text. "New federal regulation. Any deal this size involving healthcare needs oversight and a co-signature from a third-party firm with restructuring credits." Guess who they picked? I read it twice to make sure I wasn't seeing things. There it was in black and white. Northgate Strategies designated consultant and co-signatory. My chest tightened, not with nerves, but with something closer to glee. Preston and Camille had no idea. They'd submitted this months ago, probably through some lawyer who'd heard Northgate's name in a boardroom whisperer, never knowing who was behind it. I leaned back, a grin tugging at my mouth. "They don't know, do they?" I said, more to myself than a Bryn. She smirked, crossing her arms. Not a clue. They think they're meeting some faceless suit tomorrow. I pictured it. Preston strutting into that meeting, Camille at his side with her designer bag and her smug little smile, expecting to steamroll some pencil pusher into signing off on their deal. They'd mocked me last night, thinking I was still the guy fetching coffee, and now their whole $100 million play depended on me. The irony was so thick, I could have spread it on toast. I tapped the file with my pen, my mind already racing. Set the meeting, I told Bryn, keeping my voice steady even though I wanted to laugh out loud. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. our conference room, and make sure I'm at the head of the table. She nodded, already pulling out her phone to make it happen. You got it, boss? She said. And there was a glint in her eye that told me she was enjoying this as much as I was. After she left, I sat there for a minute staring at the file. The numbers stared back. Projected profits, asset valuations, debt ratios. It was a solid plan on paper. But I knew Preston. He was all flash, no depth. He'd overpay to look like a big shot and scrambled to cover the gaps later. I'd seen his type a dozen times. Guys who think money buys success instead of strategy. This deal could work, but not without Northgate's tweaks. And definitely not without my signature. I flipped the file closed and took a sip of coffee, letting the bitter taste ground me. Last night, they'd laughed at me in front of a room full of strangers. Tomorrow, they'd walk into my house begging for my help, and they wouldn't even know it was mine until I sat down. It was almost too perfect. I spent the rest of the day prepping. I called in my team, 6 of us total, including Ben, and we went over the proposal line by line. We found holes just like I'd expected. Inflated revenue forecasts, shaky financing, a timeline that had collapsed under its own weight. They're betting on momentum, not math, Brent said, scribbling notes. I nodded, marking up my own copy. We'll fix it, I said, but on our terms. By the time we finished, it was dark outside. The city lights blinking through the blinds. I sent everyone home, but I stayed, tweaking the revised contract alone. I didn't need to gloat or rub it in their faces. That wasn't the point. The point was control. They'd walked over me for years, thinking I was nothing. Tomorrow, they'd see what nothing could do. As I locked up and headed to my car, I felt the weight of it settle in. Not heavy, but solid. This wasn't just about Preston and Camille. It was about every time someone had looked past me, every time they'd assumed I was less. I built Northgate to prove them wrong. And now the proof was coming to my table. I drove home through the quiet streets, the file riding shotgun, and let myself imagine their faces when I walked in. It wasn't revenge? Not really. It was justice served cold and quiet. Tomorrow, the irony would hit them like a freight train, and I'd be the one holding the throttle. The next morning, I woke up early. The kind of early where the sky is still gray and the streets are silent, except for the occasional delivery truck. I stood in my kitchen, brewing coffee and a pot that had seen better days, and watched the steam curl up toward the ceiling. My apartment wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a worn couch, a view of the city that was more rooftops than skyline. But it was mine, paid for with money nobody knew I had. I pulled on a suit, nothing flashy, just a dark gray one that fit well, and tied my tie in the mirror. Today wasn't about looking like a king. It was about sitting like one. I grabbed the revised contract, slid it into my briefcase, and headed out. The drive to the office was quick, the city waking up around me, and I felt a hum in my chest. Not nerves, but something alive. Ready. By 9:45, I was in the building, standing outside our conference room behind a one-way glass panel. Ben had set it up perfectly. Long table, polished wood, a wall screen for presentations, and my chair at the head, empty for now. I watched as Vance Cortez Holdings arrived. Preston strode in first, his suit probably worth more than my car, his jaw set like he was about to conquer something. Camille followed, her heels clicking, her hair swept back in that way she always did when she wanted to look untouchable. They had a small team with them, 2 lawyers in stiff suits carrying briefcases and an assistant trailing behind with a tablet. Bring greeted them all professional charm, shaking hands and offering coffee. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Cortez, thank you for being early," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "The CEO will join you shortly." Camille smirked, glancing around the room, still sending in the coffee boy first. "Huh?" she said loud enough for Preston to chuckle. I clenched my jaw behind the glass, but kept still. They didn't recognize the building, didn't know they were on my turf. I let them settle in, watching from my spot. Preston spread out his papers, rehearsing his pitch to the lawyers, his voice booming with that fake confidence he loved to throw around. Camille sat beside him, checking her lipstick in her phone screen, adjusting her necklace like this was a photo shoot instead of a meeting. The clock hit 9:58, and I straightened my tie one last time. Bryn caught my eye through the glass and gave a tiny nod. It was time. I took a breath, pushed the door open, and walked in. The room went quiet, heads turning as I crossed to the head of the table. Preston's assistant looked confused. The lawyers shuffled their papers, and Camille's eyes narrowed like she was trying to place me. I set my briefcase down, pulled out the chair. "And Saturday morning," I said, my voice steady, meeting their stares one by one. Preston leaned forward, his brow creasing. "We're waiting for Northgate's CEO," he said, his tone flat like I was some intern who'd wandered in by mistake. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, then at Camille, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them squirm. "You just found him," I said, leaning back in my chair. The words landed like a brick through a window. Camille blinked, her phone slipping an inch in her hand. Preston's mouth opened, then closed, his eyes darting to his team as if they'd explain it. The lawyers froze, pins hovering over their notepads. Bryn stepped forward, all business, and handed me a remote for the screen. "Shall we get started?" she asked, her tone neutral, but her eyes dancing with the same thrill I felt. I nodded, and she clicked it on. The Northgate logo flashed up, simple, bold, unmistakable. Preston's assistant whispered something to the lawyer next to her, but I didn't catch it. I didn't need to. The room was mine now, Logan. Camille said, her voice thin like she couldn't believe it. I ignored her, opening my briefcase and pulling out the revised contract. "This is the deal we're discussing today," I said, sliding it across the table toward Preston. "Vince Cortez Holdings wants to acquire those medical facilities. Fine. But it's not happening without Northgate's sign-off. And I've made some changes." Preston snatched the papers, flipping through them, his face tightening with every page. Camille just stared at me, her lipstick perfect, but her expression cracking. "You're not serious," she muttered half to herself. I met her gaze, calm as ever. "Dead serious," I said. "You're in my house now. Let's talk terms." Preston finally spoke, his voice rough. "You're telling me you're the CEO? You the guy who?" He stopped, glancing at Camille, then back at me. I didn't rise to it. I just pointed to the screen where Bryn had pulled up a summary slide. Northgate track record, years of quiet wins, companies we'd pulled from the edge. "That's what I've been doing while you were busy laughing," I said. "Now your deal's got holes. Overvalued assets, shaky loans, a timeline that'll collapse in 6 months. I fixed it. You're welcome." He glared at me, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did I. The meeting stretched on, but it wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. Preston tried to push back, tossing out buzzwords like leverage and market confidence. But I shut him down with facts line by line. Camille stayed quiet, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes flicking between me and the table like she was rewriting history in her head. By the end, Preston's team was nodding, scribbling notes, agreeing to my terms because they had no choice. The deal would go through, but it would be my deal, not theirs. I signed the last page, slid it back, and stood. "We're done here," I said. "Bryn will see you out." They filed out, Preston muttering under his breath, Camille trailing behind without a word. I watched them go, the door clicking shut, and let out a slow breath. The table was mine, and so was the game. They'd walked in blind, and I turned it around. Simple as that. The silence in that conference room after they walked out felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty chairs, the scattered papers, the half-empty coffee cups Preston's team had left behind. My revised contract sat at the center of the table, my signature bold on the last page, a mark they couldn't erase. Bryn stepped back in, shutting the door behind her, and gave me a look that was half smirk, half pride. "Well," she said, crossing her arms. "That was something." I nodded, running a hand through my hair, feeling the adrenaline still buzzing under my skin. It wasn't just a meeting. It was the moment I'd been building toward for years, and it had hit them like a sledgehammer. For those first few seconds after I'd said, "You just found him," nobody moved. Preston's face had gone from smug to slack, like someone had pulled the plug on his whole act. Camille's eyes widened, then narrowed, her lips parting like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. The lawyers exchanged glances, their pens frozen mid-scribble, and the assistant dropped her tablet on the table with a soft thud. I'd waited for that silence, savored it. It was the sound of their world tilting, and I was the one who tipped it. "This is a joke," Preston had muttered, his voice low, almost pleading, like he was begging reality to bend back in his favor. "You're a secretary." I didn't blink. I just turned to Bryn and said, "Show them the Northgate financials." She clicked the remote, and the screen behind me lit up. Numbers, graphs, hard proof of what I'd built. There it was in black and white. $189 billion in client assets managed, a 92% success rate in restructuring, 11 Fortune 500 companies pulled from the brink, all under my watch. I watched their eyes dart across the screen, Preston's jaw tightening, Camille's hands clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. "That's what I've been doing," I said, my voice calm but firm while you were busy underestimating me. I slid the contract across the table, the sound of paper onward cutting through the tension. "This is the only version we'll be signing. Take it or leave it." Preston grabbed it, flipping through the pages like he could find a loophole to claw his way out. His fingers trembled just enough for me to notice, and I let myself enjoy it. Not with a smile, but with a quiet nod to myself. Camille didn't touch it. She just sat there staring at me, her face pale under her perfect makeup. I could see it in her eyes, the wheels turning, the memories replaying. Every time she'd mocked me, every time she'd told me I'd never amount to anything, every time she'd walked away thinking she'd won. "Logan," she said again, softer this time, like she was testing the word. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The scream behind me was my voice now, shouting what I'd kept quiet for a decade. Preston stopped flipping pages and looked up, his bravado cracking. "You're telling me you've been running this whole thing?" he said, his tone somewhere between disbelief and anger. "The whole damn company." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. Every call, every deal, every turnaround, I said. Me. He shook his head, muttering something under his breath, probably a curse, but he didn't push back. He couldn't. The truth was too big, too solid. The rest of the meeting was a blur of numbers and terms. But it wasn't really a discussion. They'd come in expecting to dictate, and I'd flip the script. Preston tried to argue a few points, tossing out weak objections about financing and timelines. But I had the data ready. Every flaw in their original plan laid bare. You overpaid here, I said, pointing to a line in the contract. And your debt structure is a house of cards. I fixed it. Sign it or walk away. His lawyers nodded along, scribbling notes, too smart to fight a losing battle. Camille stayed silent, her eyes locked on me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. The woman who'd laughed at me in that restaurant last night didn't know this Logan, the one who'd built an empire while she wasn't looking. When it was over, they signed. Preston's hand shook as he scrolled his name, and Camille didn't even look at the pin when she added hers. They gotten their deal, but it was mine now. My terms, my rules. I stood, buttoning my jacket, and said, "Good doing business with you." It wasn't sarcastic, just final. They filed out, Preston's shoulders slumped, Camille's heels clicking slower than they had coming in. The doors shut, and Bryn let out a low whistle. "You okay?" she asked, stacking the leftover papers. I nodded, feeling the weight lift off me. Not all of it, but enough. "Better than okay," I said. That was the reveal I've been waiting for. I didn't need to say more. She knew what it meant. 10 years of playing the shadow, of taking the insults and turning them into fuel, all boiling down to that one moment. Their faces when I sat at the head of the table, when the numbers flashed up, when they realized who I was. It wasn't just victory. It was proof. Proof that I'd been right to keep going. To build in silence, to let them think they'd won until I could show them they hadn't. I didn't gloat as they left. I didn't have to. The reveal was enough, and it had echo louder than any words I could have thrown at them. They'd mocked me last night, but today they'd signed my contract. That was all I needed to see. After they left the conference room, I stayed behind for a while. Just me and the quiet. The table was a mess, papers scattered, coffee cups tipped over, a pin one of Preston's lawyers had forgotten glinting under the lights. I sank back into my chair at the head, the leather creaking under me, and let the moment settle. My pulse was still up, but it wasn't racing anymore, just a steady thrum, like an engine idling after a long drive. Bryn poked her head in, holding a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "Thought we might celebrate," she said, raising an eyebrow. I nodded, and she popped the cork, the sound sharp in the empty room. We clink-ticked glasses, the bubbles fizzing against the rim, and I took a sip. It tasted good, clean, crisp, earned. "To 10 years, I said, lifting my glass again. She grinned. "To 10 years and one hell of a reveal." We didn't talk much after that. She knew I needed the space. So, she left me with the bottle and a stack of messages from the team. Congratulations, mostly mixed with a few "I told you so" from the ones who'd been in on the secret longest. I turned off my phone instead of reading them all. The news hit fast, though I didn't need to check to know. By noon, my inbox was overflowing, and Bryn came back with a printout from some online headline. Mysterious CEO of Northgate Strategies revealed. Ex-wife in the room. It was trending everywhere, she said, her voice half amused, half awed. I skimmed it, saw my name in bold, and set it aside. Let it spread, I thought. I'd spent a decade hiding. Now the world could see what I'd built. I didn't need to shout about it. The fallout would do the talking. Camille called twice that afternoon. I didn't pick up. Her number flashed on my screen, the same one I'd memorized years ago, and I just watched it ring out. Preston didn't call, but he sent an email through one of his lawyers, some polished nonsense about reviewing adjustments to the deal. I read it once, then typed back. Terms remain unchanged. Take it or leave it. I had sinned and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. They'd signed my contract, but they weren't done squirming. I'd expected that. People like them don't go down quiet. They thrash until the rope's too tight. And it was tight now. Word got back to me later that day. Other companies Preston had bullied into deals were pulling out, spooked by the news. His $100 million merger was safe thanks to me, but his reputation wasn't. Northgate stock jumped 20% by closing bell, and my office line rang off the hook with partners wanting in. I didn't gloat, not out loud. Anyway, I didn't need to. The numbers did it for me, flashing across screens from Wall Street to the blocks. Preston's empire was wobbling, and Camille's perfect little world was cracking right along with it. I pictured them in their glass-walled penthouse, arguing over what went wrong, pointing fingers at each other while the headlines piled up. My phone buzzed again, another missed call from her. I let it go to voicemail, didn't even listen. What could she say? Sorry, I didn't know. It wouldn't change a thing. She'd mocked me in that restaurant, thinking I was still the guy she'd left behind, and now she was staring at the truth. I built something bigger than she'd ever dreamed, and I'd done it without her. By evening, the office was alive with chatter. My team filtered in, slapping my back, pouring more champagne. Ben brought in a tray of sandwiches from the deli downstairs, and we ate around that same conference table where I'd turned the game on its head. You should have seen their faces, she said, laughing through a bite of turkey. Preston looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. I smiled, picking at my food. They'll get over it, I said. But I knew they wouldn't. Not really. The fallout wasn't just about the deal. It was about power shifting, about the guy they dismissed stepping out of the shadows and taking the wheel. Other firms called to some to congratulate, some to pitch new projects. I let Bryn handle them. I was done talking for the day. Later, alone again, I stood by the window watching the city lights blink on. The champagne bottle was empty, the sandwiches gone, the team back to their desks or their homes. I thought about those 10 years, the late nights, the doubts, the times I poured coffee for people who'd never know they were thanking me later. I played invisible, let them laugh, let them assume. And now the mask was off, and the fallout was theirs to deal with. Preston's board would grill him. Camille's social circle would whisper, and every deal they chased from here on out would carry my shadow. I didn't need to say a word. The silence I'd built my empire in was louder than anything they could throw back. I locked up around midnight. The building quiet, except for the hum of the janitor's vacuum down the hall. My briefcase felt lighter going home, even with the contract still inside. The fallout wasn't over. I knew that they tried to spin it, fight it, maybe even come crawling back. But it didn't matter. I'd won the moment I sat at that table, the moment they signed my terms. I drove through the empty streets, the radio off, just me and the sound of my own breathing. The victory wasn't loud or flashy. It was mine, forged in silence, and that was enough. Let them scramble. I'd already moved on. The days after that meeting felt like standing in the eye of a storm, everything spinning around me. But I was calm at the center. I woke up the next morning to my phone buzzing nonstop. Notifications piling up like leaves in a gutter. The story was everywhere. News sites, social media, even a couple of those late-night business shows where guys in suits yell about stocks. Northgate Shadow CEO steps into the light. One headline read, another went with ex-wife's restaurant jab backfires and $100 million deal. I scrolled through a few, sipping coffee at my kitchen counter, but I didn't linger. The world was doing the work for me now, spreading the truth. I'd kept quiet for years. I didn't need to add fuel to the fire. It was already burning bright. Camille didn't waste time trying to rewrite the narrative. By mid-morning, Bryn texted me a link to a podcast she'd done. An hour-long interview on some lifestyle show called The High Life. I pulled it up on my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and hit play. Her voice came through smooth and polished, the same tone she'd used to charm dinner parties back when we were married. I always believed in Logan's potential, she said about 10 minutes in. Even when we were together, I knew he had something special. People are making this into a bigger drama than it is. I snorted into my coffee. The host pressed her, asking about the restaurant, and she laughed it off. "Oh, that was just a little tease," she said. "We've always had a playful dynamic." Playful? Sure. I could still hear her voice from that night. Poor man. Still a secretary cutting through the bistro like a blade. I didn't buy it, and neither did anyone else. Someone, a random guy at the restaurant, I guess, had recorded the whole thing on his phone. By noon, the clip was online, uploaded to every platform that mattered. I found it later that day, a shaky video with bad lighting, but clear audio. There I was, walking to my table, and there she was at the bar, wine glass in hand, smirking as she called out to me. Preston's laugh followed, loud and smug, and the words echoed again, still fetching coffee for the big shots. Huh? It was raw, unfiltered, and it spread like wildfire. Comments piled up, some calling her out, some mocking Preston, a few even cheering me on. "This dude's a legend," one guy wrote. "Built an empire and let her talk herself into a hole." I didn't reply or repost it. I didn't need to. The clip was a mirror held up to her lies, and the internet was the microphone amplifying it. Preston's world started crumbling faster than hers. Word got back to me through a contact at his firm. His board was furious. The merger was locked in thanks to my signature. But the headlines made him look like a fool who'd stumbled into a deal he couldn't control. By the end of the day, he was suspended, pinning a vote of no confidence, whatever that meant for a guy like him. His team was scrambling, sending out press releases that nobody bought. I pictured him in his corner office yelling at his assistant while the walls closed in. Meanwhile, Camille went dark. Her social media accounts, usually full of curated photos and clever captions, vanished overnight, deleted probably after the video hit. I didn't check to confirm. I didn't care enough to. They reached out again, of course. Camille left another voicemail, her tone softer this time, almost pleading. "Logan, can we talk? Just call me back." I deleted it without a second thought. Preston's lawyer emailed again, a longer message about revisiting terms and mutual benefits. I didn't bother replying. The deal was done. Signed in ink and blood. My blood from years of work they'd never understand. They'd had their chance to see me back when I was pitching dreams at that wobbly kitchen table. And they'd laughed me off. Now they were begging, and I wasn't in the mood to listen. I'd taken back my power, not with a fight or a speech, but by showing them what I'd built. That was enough. The fallout kept rolling. Northgate's phone lines buzzed with new clients, old partners, even a couple of reporters sniffing for an interview. I turned them all down. Wren handled the calls, her voice crisp and professional, filtering out the noise. "You're a ghost who's not a ghost anymore," she said, dropping a stack of messages on my desk. I shrugged. "Let them talk," I said. "I'm done hiding, but I'm not here to perform." She nodded, understanding. The spotlight was on, but I wasn't about to dance in it. The video, the headlines, the whispers, they were doing the work I'd never wanted to do myself. Preston's suspension trended higher than his merger ever had, and Camille's podcast flopped under a wave of skeptical comments. The mirror was up, the microphone was on, and they couldn't escape their own reflections. I spent the evening alone, cooking a simple dinner. Steak, potatoes, nothing fancy. The TV stayed off. The phone stayed silent. I ate at my small table, the city humming outside, and felt the quiet satisfaction of it all. They'd mocked me in public, and now the public was mocking them. I didn't need to say a word, didn't need to call her back, didn't need to tweak the deal. The truth was out raw and loud, and it was cutting deeper than any comeback I could have thrown. I'd spent years building in the dark, and now the light was theirs to choke on. I finished my meal, washed the dishes, and went to bed early. The storm could rage on. I'd already weathered mine. The dust from that meeting didn't settle. It just shifted, blowing into something bigger than I'd planned. I woke up a few days later to an inbox stuffed with emails. Not just congratulations anymore, but requests. People wanted Northgate's help, my help, and not just the usual CEOs with failing companies. There were startups reaching out, small outfits run by kids barely out of college, veterans trying to turn their grid into businesses. Even a single mom who'd emailed me about her bakery going under. "I heard you save things," she wrote, her words simple but heavy. I sat there at my kitchen counter, coffee going cold, reading through them all. I'd spent a decade fixing messes for big shots who barely said thanks. Now the little guys were knocking, and it hit me different. I called Ben that morning, pacing my apartment with the phone pressed to my ear. "We need to do something," I said, my voice rough from not enough sleep. "These people, they're like I was starting with nothing. We can help them." She didn't miss a beat. "You mean a program?" she asked, already ahead of me. "Mentoring, funding, the works." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Yeah," I said, "for the overlooked ones, the ones nobody bets on." By noon, we were in the office sketching it out on a whiteboard. We called it the Legacy Blueprint, a way to take what I'd learned and pass it down. Not just money, but know-how, connections, a leg up for people who'd been told they didn't belong in the game. We launched it fast. I tapped some of Northgate's profits. Nothing crazy, just enough to get started and set up a team to run it. Bryn took the lead, her sharp mind cutting through the details like a blade. We targeted startups led by first-generation college grads, veterans, anyone who'd been underestimated like I had. I'd meet with them myself sometimes, sitting across from nervous kids in hoodies or grizzled ex-soldiers with doe-geared notebooks listening to their pitches. "I don't care about your resume," I'd tell them. "Show me what you've got." Some had wild ideas, apps, green tech, little manufacturing gigs. Others just needed a push to keep going. I'd give them advice, hook them up with my contacts. Sometimes write a check if the numbers made sense. It wasn't charity, it was investment. The kind I wish someone had made in me back then. Ren stepped up too, more than I'd expected. I made her COO a week after the program kicked off, handing her the reins to Northgate day to day so I could focus on the blueprint. She deserved it. Years of keeping my secrets, crunching numbers, holding the line. "You sure about this?" she asked when I told her. Her arms crossed like she was waiting for the catch. "Positive," I said. "You've earned it." She didn't argue, just nodded and got to work. With her running the show, our staff doubled. New analysts, project managers, a couple of assistants who weren't me playing pretend anymore. The office buzzed now, not just with deals, but with purpose. We weren't a shadow firm anymore. We were a name people knew, and they came to us for more than just rescues. The companies we'd saved over the years started sending stuff. Thank you plaques, holiday baskets, handwritten letters from CEOs I'd never met face to face. One came from Tom, the guy from Trident Hall. My first win. Heard you're the big shot now, he wrote in his messy scroll. Knew you had it in you. I stuck it on my desk right next to the college photo and smiled every time I saw it. Power wasn't just about being in the room anymore. It was about who I could bring with me. The Blueprint kids started showing results fast. A vet's trucking company turned a profit in 6 months. A tech startup landed a contract with a big retailer. I'd sit in on their updates, watching them grin as they talked numbers and feel something I hadn't in years. Pride, not just for me, but for them. Camille's words didn't haunt me anymore. Poor man. Still a secretary. That line used to loop in my head on bad days. A taunt I couldn't shake. Now it was just noise drowned out by the hum of what I'd built. She and Preston were fading. Last I heard, their merger was limping along, barely breaking even, and their names were more punchline than power. I didn't check up on them. Didn't need to. They'd paid rent in my mind for too long. Now they were evicted, and the space was mine again. I turned their mockery into fuel, and the Blueprint was the engine it powered. Every kid who walked through my door, every business I helped stand up, was a brick in a legacy that had outlasted their jabs. By month's end, the office walls were lined with photos. Me shaking hands with founders, cutting ribbons at their launches, toasting with Bryn and the team. It wasn't the quiet I'd lived in for a decade, but it was better. I'd spent years proving I could win alone. Now I was proving I didn't have to. One night, I stayed late going over a pitch from a young woman who wanted to start a community gym. Her numbers were shaky, but her heart was there. I scribbled notes, sent her an email with fixes, and leaned back, the city glowing outside. This was it. The real win. Not just sitting at the head of the table, but building a table big enough for others to sit at, too. I locked up and drove home, the road quiet, my mind full. The legacy was mine now, and it was just getting started. Months after that showdown with Preston and Camille, I stood in Northgate's headquarters, a glass of scotch in my hand, looking out over a room I'd never imagined back in that cramped office above the Thai takeout. It was a private dinner, one I'd thrown together to mark where we'd landed. Not just me, but the whole team, the partners, the people who'd walked this road with me. The conference room was transformed. Long tables draped in white cloth, candles flickering, the smell of roasted lamb and garlic drifting from trays the caterers had set up. At the center of it all was my spot, the head of the table where a brass nameplate sat. Logan Shaw, CEO. No aliases, no shadows, just my name, solid and real. The guest list was a mix. Newly signed partners who joined after the merger mess went public. Former clients I'd pulled from the edge years ago, and a handful of young founders from the legacy Blueprint, their faces bright with nerves and hope. Bryn was there, of course, laughing with a glass of wine in her hand, her COO title fitting her like a glove. The team mingled too, analysts, managers, even the new assistants who'd taken over the coffee runs I used to fake. Everyone was here because of what we'd built, not just in money or deals, but in trust. I'd spent a decade serving coffee to hide who I was. Now I was serving dinner to show it. I'd heard about Preston and Camille through the grapevine. Nothing direct, just bits and pieces that floated back to me. Their empire had crumbled quiet and slow, like a house left to rot. The merger I'd signed off on was holding, but barely profits thin. Investors pulling out, their names tied to a story nobody wanted to touch. Last I knew, Camille was off in Lake Co., some solo vacation to find herself. According to a mutual friend who'd mentioned it in passing, Preston was back at his dad's old firm, a failing outfit he'd once bragged about leaving behind. I didn't dig for details. They didn't matter anymore. Their world had shrunk while mine grew, and that was the end of it. The dinner started easy. Small talk, clinking glasses, the hum of voices filling the room. I stayed quiet at first, letting it wash over me. A guy from a logistics firm I'd saved years back came over, shaking my hand hard. "Never thank you proper," he said, his voice rough. "Thought we were done for till you showed up." I smiled, told him it was nothing, but it wasn't. Those early wins were the bones of everything I had now. A kid from the blueprint, a wiry vet named Marcus, who'd started a delivery service, tapped me on the shoulder later. "Got my first big contract last week," he said, grinning. "Your advice, cut the fat, focus on the core." It worked. I nodded, proud in a way that hit deeper than any boardroom victory. Dinner rolled out. Plates of lamb, mashed potatoes, greens that actually tasted good. I ate slow, watching the room. Bin caught my eye from across the table, raising her glass with a smirk, like she knew what I was thinking. She'd been there from the start, back when it was just us and a folding table. And now she was running half the show. The founders swapped stories with the partners. The old clients toasted the new ones. And I felt it. The shift from what I'd done alone to what we were doing together. This wasn't just my table anymore. It was theirs too. And that was the point. When the plates were cleared, I stood, tapping my glass with a spoon. The room hushed. I was turning my way. I didn't have a speech planned. Just a few words I've been rolling around in my head. "Thanks for being here," I started, my voice steady. "Some of you I've known forever. Some of you I'm just meeting, but you're all part of this. Northgate, the blueprint. Whatever we build next." I paused, looking at the nameplate, then back at them. I spent a long time proving I could sit here. Took a lot of years, a lot of quiet. But power is not about the chair. It's about what you do with it. So here's to power. The kind you don't have to shout about. I raised my glass, and they did too. The clinks echoing soft and warm. The applause came, polite but real. And I sat back down, letting the moment land. After that, the night loosened up. More drinks, more laughs. Marcus pulled me aside to show me his latest numbers on his phone, all excited, and I gave him a few pointers while the caterers brought out dessert. A partner from a tech firm asked about expanding the blueprint, and I told him we'd talk next week. It wasn't a party for show. It was a marker, a line in the sand between what I'd been and what I was now. I'd served consequences to Preston and Camille, sure. But this was bigger. This was about building something that lasted, something that didn't need their approval or their scorn. The night wound down late. People trickled out, shaking my hand, promising to stay in touch. Bryn was the last to go, clapping me on the back. "Good table," she said, nodding at it. "Fits you." I grinned and she left, her heels clicking down the hall. I stayed behind, cleaning up a little old habits, and stood by the window, the city dark and quiet below. The nameplate caught the light, and I ran my thumb over it. 10 years of coffee runs of silence, of proving myself to nobody but me. Now I was here at the head of a table I'd made, surrounded by people who'd carry it forward. That was power, real, steady, mine. I locked up, drove home, and slept sound. The satisfaction deeper than anyone I'd ever chased.